Thank you very much. So just a little bit about today. You've seen the agenda on Eventbrite, but we are going to be hearing from Edinburgh City Council Archives. We're going to be hearing from Glasgow Women's Library and Dunkeld Community Archives. And then we'll have a short tea break, and then we'll be returning to a Q&A session after that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speakers, and they are from Edinburgh City Council Archivists. And that is Jennifer Hogg, who's the archivist, and we're going to hear from the volunteer, Sarah Sergio Lorido, and I hope I pronounced that right. Thanks.
Hi there, I'm Jennifer. I'm one of 3 archivists and records officers at Edinburgh City Council, and as you can imagine, with there only being 3 of us, we're pretty busy. We also do records management for the council as well, so that adds to our workload. So we really value our volunteers and rely on them quite a lot. You know, they've been a huge help to us over the years. But I imagine, like a lot of archives, certainly in the past, our volunteers and the opportunities that we give them are very traditional, or have been up until recently. So the sort of things that we would have them doing traditionally would have been, you know, box listing, basic preservation, that sort of thing. And we've had a really brilliant relationship with our volunteers. We've had a steady stream of volunteers for probably about 18 years, but they've very much fallen into 2 different camps. They've either been retired individuals or students. And I actually started with Edinburgh City Archives myself as a volunteer about 15 years ago. I was a mature student. I didn't know what to do with myself when I was going to graduate. So about 3rd year, reached out to a couple of archives in Edinburgh, accepted me as a volunteer. I'm still here 14, 15 years later. So it's obviously been quite a good experience. And I'm, you know, now wanting to encourage other volunteers and other people coming through the courses. So with students, especially if they're doing the records and archives course, what we try and do is match the tasks that we give them to what they're doing on their course. And that's always been really important to us. So they're getting practical experience alongside the things that they're reading and the sort of work they're doing for their uni work. We've been really lucky with our volunteers over the years, and we've had photographers, people that are brilliant with computers, retired librarian, university lecturers, and we also had a home economics teacher who brought the most fantastic cakes when she was in, so she was a big miss when she left. We've had a volunteer who she was absolutely brilliant with databases, and she actually created for us our inventory for our repository when we moved. So that's, you know, we couldn't live without that. So the fact that we had someone who could come in and do that, who wasn't a member of staff, that was brilliant. And we used that daily. So that was about 11 years ago we moved, and we're still using that all the time. We sometimes have groups who come in, maybe come in either once a week or once a month, and they work on various different things. And the sort of examples we've got of groups coming in, we had Boroughmuir Former Pupils Association, Boroughmuir High School. They came in recently. We'd had a lot of records transferred from the school, and the Former Pupils group came in and they organised them and listed them for us. So we now have a database and a digital finding aid. So that's been really brilliant. We had another group who came in. They came in once a month and they cleaned and reboxed and listed all our Dean of Guild building warrants. And again, that's something that we use a lot. So that was a brilliant task. Again, something we couldn't have done ourselves. And another group, thanks to the wonders of SharePoint and the fact that more than one person can work in a spreadsheet at one time, they were able to list over 30 volumes of general conviction registers. And they're not quite finished yet, but they're getting there. So you can imagine how long that was taking. When this project started, it was one person doing it. And then we went to having about 5 people working on it at one time. So we've really raced through that, and that's been absolutely brilliant. We also have a couple of retired archivists, and they've been able to take on larger cataloguing projects for us that we just don't have the time to do. But because of their expertise, they can be just left to get on with that, and that's been really brilliant. But times are changing, and we need to change with the times too. We now have a digital archivist, which is a huge boon for us. That's made a real big difference. With the increase in born digital records, the council has recently invested in a digital repository. So we've been given things over the years on USBs and external hard drives, but we've not been able to do a great deal with them. So now we're able to get them uploaded into our digital repository, which is fantastic. And we're working on guidance, and what we plan to do is get some of our volunteers involved in this going forward, so we can get all these things off the hard drives and into a more safe place so that they can be migrated as and when technology changes. The real big hope for this, though, is that this could maybe be done remotely. We've in fact had one volunteer recently who was able to carry out a remote project, and this was to archive a website for a local group within Edinburgh. And it was actually one of our student volunteers, and she was able to crawl the website and basically create a copy of this. Now, this creates a static copy of the website, so not exactly the same as being able to go onto the website, but it means it can be preserved. And the fact that she was able to do this remotely was fantastic. It means it opens up opportunities for people who wouldn't necessarily be able to come into the city archives or wouldn't be able to carry out the physical side of the work. So yeah, archiving is often physical. So developing remote volunteering tasks opens up new opportunities for individuals. Recently, the council put out a call to services to see if they would be able to offer a work placement to care experienced individuals. And we've put ourselves forward for this. Now, obviously, it isn't a voluntary post, it's a paid post. But what we're really hoping is that this will be a good learning opportunity for us as a team to find new ways to engage and work with people who wouldn't traditionally come into the archives, wouldn't maybe traditionally be able to help if it was more of a physical side of the job. So we're really looking forward to that. There's going to be a 16-week placement for someone, and it's going to be a real opportunity for them, but it's also going to be a great opportunity for us. So although compared to other people that are speaking today, we are very much at the beginning of our journey of trying to include people from right across the city, different groups, different diversities. I hope that you can see from the things that I've spoken about today that we're working really, really hard on this. It's something that's now become much more of a priority for us. Volunteers used to be, we could fit them in round about other things, but now we really are trying hard to have a volunteer programme and create tasks that anyone can do remotely and by coming into the city archives. So some of these things are going to be difficult and it's going to take us quite a while, but other things we're definitely driving towards. And we're really, really excited about the new opportunities that will be coming up, and we're very much at the beginning, but we're hoping that with a bit of hard work and a bit of time, we'll be able to be advertising different and varied types of volunteering opportunities with us at the council.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. I'm just going to introduce the volunteer, actually, Sarah, who is working with Jennifer. Sarah, would you like to unmute and just tell us a little bit about how you came to be volunteering at Edinburgh City Council Archive?
Yeah, so my name is Sarah. I've been a volunteer for almost 7 months in the Edinburgh City Archives, and I started because I participated in another project that has been done in the archive, which is the Voices Project. So this project was basically interviewing people from Edinburgh and also people from abroad who came to live in Edinburgh to have like a sound oral history archive from different stories of the city. So that's how I came to be a volunteer there, because I'm from Spain and I moved to Edinburgh 2 years ago. And since I told in my interview for the Voices Project that I was interested in working in like the heritage sector or archives, because I did English literature at university. So I started being like a regular volunteer, and I go like once a week and I work on different projects. So as Jen said, there are like kind of two sides of volunteering. So you can be more like a physical side, doing like retrievals and returns of items, moving documents, and also another part that's more like relax. So I basically do sometimes like research for archive users, or I also do a lot of projects on listing and going through boxes, organizing everything. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a project that I'm doing now that's very interesting. So it's like an example of the things I do. So this one is a former senior guard and tour guide at the Edinburgh Castle donated a lot of letters and different documents of when he used to work there. So there are many interesting letters from like different politicians or ambassadors. And he's also really involved in the project. So he came himself to give us the letters and we could talk to him. And he gave us some context about them. So I think this could be really interesting for like people who want to research things about Edinburgh and the castle, but also about like other countries, because many of the letters mention like different political events that were going on or why the ambassadors came to the UK. So I think that's like really interesting. It's almost like living history of the city. And basically, finally, I wanted to mention what I gained from volunteering. So I feel like on a personal level, I think it's beneficial for anyone really, if you're like Jen said, like a retired person or a student. If you're interested in history, it can be like, if you're really passionate about it, you can learn a lot from a very like privileged position, because you're living history and making it accessible to other people and learning more about a community, which I think it's really nice for me who am new to the city. And then on a professional level, I'm interested in doing a career in like archives or records management. So this gave me like a really nice basic level of understanding of how to catalog, how to handle retrievals and returns, and how the local archive works in general. So that was really good to put on my applications to do a master's, which I will be starting in September. And as Jen said as well, it's really nice that I will be able to do the theory in my course, but also get some practical work while I'm still volunteering at the archive. So yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. That's really interesting, and I'm delighted that you are now going on to do a qualification in archives. That's fantastic. We've got questions, I'm sure, that will come at the end, I'm afraid, rather than now, because I'm going to introduce the next set of speakers. So Sarah, please hang around, because there is going to be a question for you. So our next speakers come from the Chapter House Museum Trust and the Community Archive in Dunkeld, Perthshire. So these collections include a regimental archive of the Scottish Horse, and the museum is based in Dunkeld Cathedral, which is quite unusual as well. So we are going to hear from Ruth Brown, who's the manager and curator at the museum and the archive, and we're going to hear from Imogen Bell, who started as a volunteer, but I think she's recently started in a new role, which I think we'll hear a little bit more about now.
Hi everyone. So we're in a very small village in central Scotland. There's just over 2,000 residents in Dunkeld, so it's a very small place. We are a small museum and archive that was established in 1994 by a group of local historians, kind of amateur historians. So it's a private charitable trust. Pre-COVID, our volunteers were dwindling in numbers. And they were, I think, an average age of, they were pretty much all 65 plus before COVID. Apart from myself, I had been volunteering here for about 10 years. So I was always the kind of youngest one, I suppose, here. So we were down to about 6 people before COVID. And the museum itself is an unmanned museum, and the archive was only open 3 mornings a week. So during COVID, we had big changes. We received funding for a manager's post, which has enabled us to open full time. And so that's really kind of increased the accessibility for volunteers, because it was only open 6 hours a week. It's now open all week. It's open full time. And although the village is small and there's a lot going on in the village, so there's a lot of volunteering options, we have actually increased our volunteer base to, it's about 23 now volunteers. And our age range is now 16 to 96. So it's changed dramatically. So through our enhanced awareness in the village, what we're by doing events and exhibitions, social media, our website, local advertising, we've kind of attracted more volunteers. And I would also like to say that Make Your Mark has had a huge difference in the age range of volunteers and the area that they're coming from. Before, it was all volunteers from Dunkeld, apart from Imogen, but Imogen came off the back of her mum being a nurse giving our chair of our trustees her COVID vaccination, and they were chatting, and it became apparent that Imogen had just finished her degree and was needing work experience to get into the sector. So that's how Imogen came to us to volunteer. But Make Your Mark has opened it up. We now have somebody coming from Edinburgh. We had somebody coming up from Stirling. We've unfortunately just lost Laura, actually, who was coming up from Stirling. She was with us from mid-November last year, but has now got herself her first full-time job. So her coming here has helped her gain experience, and her confidence has obviously it's helped with her confidence. She was quite a quiet girl when she came, and so we're hopeful that we were part of that journey for her to go into employment. So yeah, so I would say that we're certainly doing well with the amount of volunteers that we have now, considering the size of the village. We also, as we don't really kind of stipulate exactly what people should be doing in here. There's lots of different projects going on, lots of different opportunities for working in the back room, I suppose, with the archive and accessioning and transcription and research requests, but there's also front of house jobs to be done, and it's the people that come, they decide what they want to do, rather than us, like I say that we need somebody for this post and that's all we need. If somebody comes in and they want to work purely on transcription, then that's what we'll arrange for them to do. So I think because we're quite small, we can be very flexible with what people do. So we just kind of adapt to the people's skills and teach new skills if they're willing to be taught, but some people are very fixed with what they want to do here. So like I've said about Imogen, she came to volunteer with us last July, and I'll let Imogen kind of now tell you all about her experience as a volunteer, and then we gained funding for Imogen to do a project to create 3D images for online exhibitions, but also she's doing her apprenticeship through Museum Gallery Scotland with us now. So I should pass you on to Imogen.
Hello. We're just sharing webcam. I'm signed up to be here. So I started volunteering last July, as you said, because I finished my degree and I was struggling to find any sort of roles that were local. And as you said, my mum started speaking to the chair of the trustees for the chapter house. And I started volunteering 2 days a week alongside another job that I had. But I was doing all sorts of activities because when I first came along, I think I was really the start of the wave of the younger volunteers coming in. Yes. So I was doing all sorts of things. I helped out with research requests, the front of house, funding applications and things, because there's a real lack of sort of specialist funders in the area. So we had to apply for our own stuff. There's a lot of accessioning that needs to be done in archives, especially when you start to raise awareness. So we started getting a lot more donations and things into the archive that we've been trying to keep on top of, just because people have become aware of us in the village and we've been brought all sorts of new things. So we've ended up with museum cabinets and all sorts because we're trying to expand our collection and make sure it's all kept safe. We really upped our social media presence, which I think has helped sort of outreach with people outside of Dunkeld, because there's a lot of links to other communities that are like people whose family moved over to America and Australia. We've had a lot of visitors in who would love to volunteer, but simply live on the other side of the globe. So it's not quite possible. But I've had a great time as a volunteer, which is why I'm so happy to have a job here, because I got such good experience, and I was doing everything from digitizing documents to chatting to people who are in for a visit. And it's really helped me gain confidence within the heritage sector. I think we've pretty much covered everything I'm up for. So it's just been a lovely experience, and it's great to see other young people coming into the archive, as well as the standard volunteers that have been here since the 90s. It's really nice to have other young people with an interest coming into the archive and helping them gain some new experience as well.
And I'd just like to say, to kind of duplicate the previous speakers' comments about us not being able to function without volunteers. They're very, very important in the museum sector.
That is great. No, thank you very much. I do encourage people to pop any questions into the chat, because one of the things I wanted to ask you was, I know that you studied imaging. You don't need to tell me now, tell me later, but I'd be interested to know what your course was and is it relevant to the volunteering you're doing at the moment, just because Ruth was mentioning that you were looking for work. So that's quite interesting to know what you're doing and more about your apprenticeship. But I think we will keep all the questions to the end. So I want to say thank you, guys. And we're going to go over to our final speakers, who are from the Glasgow Women's Library. We welcome today Nicola, who's an archivist, Gabrielle, the volunteer coordinator, and Cass, who is one of the volunteers within the archive there. If you don't know the Glasgow Women's Library, it's dedicated to women's lives and the history of women's lives. It is a lending library, which is rather unusual. It's an information hub, and it has got a vast programme of exhibitions, events, and lots of other activities as well. So I'm going to pass over now to Gabrielle, who is going to share her screen with a PowerPoint presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Audrey. Yes, I'm just gonna start off with a little overview of GWL and our volunteering program, and then Nicola's going to talk more specifically about the archive collections and how volunteers work with her, and then Cass will give her experience. Yeah, as Audrey said, we're a lending library as well as an archive, and the only accredited museum to women's history in the UK. I can't move my slides. I'm going to try again. Oh. Okay. Just some images of our building, which is in Glasgow's East End in Bridgeton. And yeah, we host events and including film screenings and exhibitions and workshops and lots more in this space. In terms of the volunteering program, it's myself who I work 3 days a week, and my colleague Ren Clark, who also works 3 days. So we together support around 80 volunteers a year. Every year, about 35 new volunteers come on board, and so that I suppose means we retain about 50 kind of year on year. So there is some turnover, which I suppose we really expect, because people come on board usually, I mean, not all the time, but sometimes it kind of transitions in their life. Maybe they're between jobs or finishing studies, and looking for work, or people move away. And I've come to realize over the years of doing this job that volunteering sometimes is something that people turn to when there's a bit of a gap in their lives. Our approach to involve volunteers is very much around being flexible and understanding that volunteering isn't always the top priority for people. People want to do it, but ultimately they are looking for work, or they've got other responsibilities, or they have, I don't know, health issues. So being flexible around understanding those needs and how can we work around that so that people are able to volunteer when they want to. We also have a big focus on inclusion. I'll talk a bit about that later in terms of our recruitment policy. And I think with that comes a focus on being person-centered and getting to know our volunteers and understanding why it is they want to volunteer, what they want to get from it, and what we can do to make it easier for them to volunteer with us. So we do really focus on volunteers' interest, as Ruth has said as well with Dunkeld, but finding out what motivates people to volunteer, and then matching that to our organisational needs. And I sometimes think, like, my job and my colleague Ren's jobs is really like this, doing this matchmaking of like finding out what volunteers need and then thinking, right, how can that slot in with what the organisation and my colleagues need. So our volunteers come from quite diverse backgrounds. People who have retired and have extra time on their hands, students or newly graduates, people who might be looking for work, or maybe who are out of work because of caring for children or others, maybe because of an illness or disability, but also people who, because of their immigration status, are unable to work but want to be busy. I suppose that means that some volunteers have lots of work experience and others don't have very much and don't have many very formal qualifications. We find that people volunteer with us for lots of different reasons. People want to be busy, people want to share their skills, people want to meet other people. They might want to practice their English or pick up IT skills. People want to contribute to this organization. They like what they see and they want to be part of it. Some people want to get work experience. And I think something that we see a lot as well is people want to be part of a community, and they find that sense of community in this space. And volunteer supporting in really lots of different ways. Nicola's going to talk a bit more about the different ways that volunteers support the work of the archive. But we can see here on the bottom left some volunteers delivering our Women's Heritage bike ride. We have a little garden that people tend to. We've recently involved volunteers in developing and recording podcasts. People help us on front of house as well. They do admin. They might subtitle videos to make them accessible before we share them on our online platforms. People help with the lending library. People create content for the website, maybe writing blogs or little research pieces to highlight books or materials from our collections. So that's also a way that can be related to the archive, but not necessarily doing more traditional like listing and cataloging tasks. And I wanted to make kind of just highlight our recruitment policy. So 5 years ago, we decided to prioritize applications from women and non-binary people who we thought might face barriers, or who we knew actually would face barriers to volunteering in other organizations, and people who we felt find in GWL an especially safe and an inclusive place where they can be themselves. So people who might find, as I said, find it difficult to, or face barriers to accessing volunteering in other places, maybe because of their financial circumstances, or because of a disability, or having English as an additional language, not having any formal qualifications, having like caring responsibilities, and also people who've experienced discrimination, whether that's racism or ableism, transphobia, sexism, and so we decided to introduce that policy because we were getting probably more applications than we really could take on board, and I suppose we were like, what would be a selection process if we can't take on every application? How are we going to narrow down who we take on board? And we thought actually some people are going to be able to volunteer in other places more easily. This is not a perfect solution in a way. It does end up excluding some people who I'm sure would benefit lots from being involved, but we've generally found it to be really successful in bringing people with a real diversity of interests, different backgrounds, in bringing people together to volunteer together who are from different backgrounds, and meeting people who they might otherwise not meet, and bringing people to engage with GWL who might otherwise not have done so, or people who've maybe not otherwise worked or had access to archives or heritage organizations, and therefore through that diversifying our audiences. I'll pass on to Nicola now, if that's okay.
Thanks, Gabby. So hi, hi everyone. I'm Nicola. I'm the archivist at GWL. I've worked at the library for 8 years. I am the GWL archivist, but I also work on projects with project staff. So we're currently working on our own 30th anniversary project just now, 3 decades of changing minds. I thought it might be useful to tell you a little bit about what is in our archive. As Gabby said, we are an accredited museum. We have a museum collection and a curator called Jenny, but obviously I'm the archivist, so I'll talk about what the volunteers work on in the archive. So the collections range from small personal paper collections to large campaign archives, things like Scottish Women's Aid and the Scottish Abortion Campaign, Zero Tolerance, sorry, I didn't see that slide, Gabby. The Zero Tolerance poster, we've got the Zero Tolerance Campaign archive. We have a big collection of publications, newsletters, journals, magazines, things like Spare Rib, but lots of more obscure feminist material. We have a big zine collection that's really popular with volunteers. That is one of our early zines from the 90s. We have a really important historical LGBTQ+ collection called the Lesbian Archive. We also there is also our own archive, basically. It's it's all the things that we've produced since we were established in 1991 that we're working on just now as part of the 30th project. So that's just a kind of quick tour of the collections, but there's loads of information, obviously, about the collections on our website.
I'm sorry, I'm making such a hash of the slides.
Sorry,
should we show any of them? Have we seen them all?
I'll just move on anyway to the volunteer
okay.
bit. The volunteers work with every aspect of the archive. As an organisation, the collections underpin everything that we do. Most of our projects have a collection element. The partners we work with usually have come to us because they're interested in the collection, and a lot of our exhibitions and programming is around the collections. I have managed volunteers for the last 8 years. I think I've got more skilled at managing them over the years. I can't imagine I was that great when I started, but I think they get a good experience now. We want obviously the experience to be good for the volunteer, but also not create like just extra work for us. I am aware that sometimes volunteering can create labour for already busy staff, especially if you've not got a lot of archive staff, or we've all got like thousands of emails to answer. I find for myself just being organised and planning ahead works for me and makes it more manageable. The volunteers usually all have something to work on, but they help me with ad hoc things as well. So it could be building boxes, or listing a new donation, or scanning for a research inquiry. So it's quite helpful to have just an extra pair of hands like in every day. We obviously want it to be a mutually beneficial relationship, so they contribute to the development of the archive and they gain skills and confidence along the way. The volunteers that I work with are quite often information management students, or they're interested in a career in collections. Many of them go on to get jobs in the sector, and then I meet them as professionals, which is always really nice. It's not exclusively, as Gabby was saying, it's not exclusively information management people, though. We have people who just love the library, people who want to get experience in a workplace, or it's a hobby for them. We've got lots of volunteers who are interested in feminism, and they're activists themselves, and they're just really excited about working with the archive. We currently have 7 volunteers working on the archive collection. Just get a drink. Some of the things that they are doing just now, Carly, is classifying our pamphlet collection according to our feminist classification system. We have a couple of volunteers, including Cass, who's here today, working on inventory spreadsheets. So it could be newsletters or material from the Lesbian Archive. We have a volunteer called Annie, who is working on our zine collection. So Annie had also applied to work at the zine library, and I matched her up with our zine collection because she was interested in the zines, but she's been adding to the catalogue and adding new accessions. We also have a volunteer just now who's transcribing some diaries from the 80s. In the past, though, volunteers have catalogued archive collections. Usually I assign this a task to information management students because quite often they have an understanding already of cataloguing procedures. They write blogs, they do social media posts, they help curate exhibitions and archive displays, they help at archive events. In the past on projects, they've taken oral history interviews and transcribed oral history interviews. So that's not an exclusive list. They do all sorts, but that covers quite a lot of it, I think. So just to finish off, just to echo what Gabby was saying about flexibility, I think the reason that it works so well for us is we are able to take a flexible approach. We realise that a lot of volunteers are young people, they've got other commitments. Quite often they're working in hospitality or they're looking for jobs. So I always try and be flexible with them as much as I can. I also tailor the tasks to their interests or try to help with their CV or career aspirations. What else? If they're interested in a specific area of the archive, say they're interested in queer history, I would let them work with that part of the collection. One of our volunteers is an information management student just now, and she's doing her dissertation. And I asked her to think of something that could be helpful to her topic. So just kind of things like that, being flexible and just being a mutually beneficial relationship. And I think that's me. Will I pass to Cass? You're right, Cass.
I'm Cass, and I've been a volunteer at the Women's Library for just over a year and a half now. And I found out about the library when I was looking for somewhere to volunteer and discovered it was handily just up the top of my street. So I started there, and I have no previous archive experience at all. I mostly work listing journals and magazines in the archive database, cataloguing issues and skim reading the contents to apply searchable keywords that can then be used by researchers. My projects can last from a few hours to a few months and have covered a variety of subjects, from the LGBT newspaper, the Pink Papers, to the women's liberation newsletters from around the country, to currently the magazines and various media related to the Association of Radical Midwives. Volunteering at the library has given me a range of new skills, and I work fully independently at times within the archives, along obviously under supervision of Nicola, and the organisational skills have vastly improved. I particularly appreciate the library's commitment to inclusion. For myself in particular, their disability inclusion has made it possible for me to take on equal footing with any other volunteer. With the library having lifts, audio loops, and a laptop with assistive technology, the library is really widely accessible. And I feel that it's this dedication to inclusion that is the reason behind the real sense of community here.
Cass, that's great. Are you finished? Do you want to say any more? You finished. Great. Well, I wasn't sure. It was so interesting what you were saying. Thank you very much. I think we've heard from all our speakers, and there's been quite a lot of activity on the chat room as well. I just want to thank all the people from the Glasgow Women's Library, our last round of speakers there. I think instead we're running ahead of time actually, so I'm going to suggest we go straight into questions actually, rather than having a break. And we've got a few questions. So what we can do is Joanna, who is behind the scenes, can read out the questions, or if anyone would like to ask their own question and unmute, could you use the reactions and raise your hand? Do you know how to do that, everyone? You go into the bottom of the screen and you will say reactions, and then there's a little icon and you can raise your hand. So if you do that, then we can know that you'd like to ask a question, and Joanna or Erin will unmute you. But if I don't see any little hands popping up, I might ask Joanna to ask the first question for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not sure. So the first question was for Sarah, and it was, could you tell us a little more about working with researchers and helping them access the archives?
Yeah, so at the City Archives, we get like many different researchers, like some people who go there for like just a day to do like a certain research, or people who go like every weekend, you see them regularly. So I came to know for the regular researchers, like what they're working on or their areas of interest. And I feel like as a volunteer, I don't spend that much time with the researchers. I do all like my own projects, more like focusing on like listing or cataloging, but I do help the archivist who's working that day to like do the retrievals for the items the researcher needs, or also do like research for them, like for example go through the index of the council minutes or the index of maps or building plans we have to find like the certain like document the person needs for the research. So that's kind of like the kind of thing I do for researchers.
That's great. Thank you very much, actually. Can I have, please comment if anyone wants to comment on what Sarah has said, and we can always go back to Sarah. But let's ask another question. Thanks, Joanne.
Okay, so I'm not sure if this was for any particular speakers, but it was asked during Ruth and Imogen's presentation. So I guess any speakers who'd like to respond. If you have a volunteer who's been with you a long time and they are very set in their ways, how do you help them to adapt to change?
We have volunteers that have been here for a while, and I think as long as you just support them and take it slowly and don't force them into doing anything they don't want to do, they kind of almost
You just ask if they're interested.
Well, yes, exactly, because they do change their minds about what they're willing to do and what they're not willing to do. And I think it's by seeing maybe other people a similar age that are doing it, they kind of naturally kind of inquire and fall into the, yeah, I would like to learn how to do that. So I think it's just supporting and not forcing. We've got one end of the spectrum to the other, where we've got there's one particular long term, she's been here for years, volunteer who's in her 80s, well into her 80s, that she didn't really want to use the computers at all, but now she's quite happily using our new database. And she's just, yeah, she's never shown that interest before and always said, I can't do that, I don't want to do that. But she just wants to be really, really helpful. And I think the more that the volunteers see that you need from them, I think they all, in their own time, will kind of come round to that, wanting to learn how to do that, to be more helpful, I think, if that makes any sense.
No, it does, because I think it's something, and maybe this is something I just want to say that Gabrielle, I think, has spoken to me about, is actually, and touched on it, is making the volunteer experience, you know, it's a two-way street, if you like. So it's something that, you know, the organisation can gain from the skills of the volunteer, but also the volunteer gets something out of it, and that's really important. that it's a mutual benefit. And I think, Gabrielle, you once mentioned to me that you actually talked to someone before deciding what type of volunteering they want to do. And I don't know, Ruth, if that's what you do as well. It's like what people are particularly interested in, if it's exhibitions, say, or cataloguing.
We have a form that they fill in, so it tells me what they did as within their working careers and what interests and hobbies that they have, so we can identify those kind of skills and yeah, if they've got a niche kind of skill that we could utilize. But that same kind of elderly volunteer there tells us quite regular that she's useless as such in here. She doesn't help much. But I mean, that particular volunteer comes 2 days a week, 1.5 days a week sort of thing. Like I say, she's in her 80s, and she is so good at speaking to the visitors coming in and the front of house visitors. And she's learning and learning and learning. We've got digital screening here, and she quite happily tells them how to use it. So she's, for somebody who had this kind of fear of tech, has naturally just kind of fell into it and is using it, and we couldn't do without Claire. She's absolutely amazing. Yet she does keep saying that she can't help much in here, but she absolutely does, and we tell her that she is indispensable.
Thank you. Gabrielle, would you say the same? Sorry, I'm just going to ask you while I'm here, because I think the question, you might have something to say.
Yeah, I agree with Ruth. I think people not making people do something they don't want to do. I mean, people are giving their time, so that seems like a pretty pointless way of approaching it. And yeah, maybe the angle of like, well, this would be really helpful. And I think this is generally when working with people and managing people, is like, if people can be part of that decision making. So it's like, I don't know what change the question's referring to, but if something is gonna, there's a new procedure or new way of doing something or new technology, if the volunteers can be involved in conversations to lead with that change, so they're in it right from the beginning, rather than it being something that's been decided without their input, I find is always a good way. And also it means that those perspectives are not missed out either when something a new procedure is being developed.
Thank you. No, that's great. Thank you. Maybe we can have our next question, Joanna.
Yeah. So Ruth kindly answered this next question in the chat, but I was wondering if any other people might want to comment on it, which is, do you find it more helpful when volunteers can commit for longer periods of time? Are you happy to accept volunteers who can only help for short amounts of time?
Who should we ask, actually? I'm just going to ask Jennifer as well. Jennifer and Gabrielle, if you have any thoughts on that. Jennifer first.
Yeah, I just think people's circumstances change, so you can't say someone has to be there for a long time or they have to see a project out. We take people on and maybe it doesn't work out or their circumstances change, so I don't think you can say you can't be here for a short time. You know, we would very much hope that people would stay, but if they can't, or if they can only commit to a short period, then absolutely we would take them on. That definitely wouldn't be a deal breaker. You know, I think because I got a lot out of volunteering myself, I'm really keen to provide that to other people, and be it they can only come in, you know, for a couple of weeks, that's fine. It's better than nothing. It's something they can put on their CV. And as everybody's already said, volunteering is a two-way thing. Yes, we get a lot out of it, but you want people to get something out of it too. And even if it is just a small amount of experience, I think that's definitely worthwhile for both parties. So yeah, I wouldn't say no to anyone if it was just for a short period. No.
Great. Gabrielle, would you say the same thing?
I think it depends what's meant by short and long. I think from our point of view, given the amount of resources that go into training and induction, a few weeks feels like someone's barely started, and we would have, you know, that would be really disappointed. So I think if someone's intending on it being a few weeks, then we probably would say like this is not the best opportunity. But having said that, we never go into a relationship with a volunteer expecting them to be with us, you know, forever, and a complete understanding that their circumstances could change. So even if they do intend to be with us for like 2 or 3 months, that could be curtailed, and like never any like judgment or, you know, yeah, you know, we want anyone to feel guilty for that. So yeah, so no, it's not something that we judge an application on, unless it is going to be like, oh, it's like a few weeks, in which case we probably would think this is not worth it for, I think, for volunteers and for us, because actually, how long, I mean, for someone to get a proper experience, I don't believe that coming in for like 3 or 4 hours a week for 3 weeks is going to be super valuable. But I might be missing something here, so like maybe I can get more information from Jennifer. And I saw David clapping as well, so I can ask David what he thinks.
Yeah, I think as well, actually, what you're do as well, you mentioned it there, is you have an induction for all your volunteers. So actually that must take up at least one of those time slots or weeks for in the volunteer program. And you also must have a volunteer policy, and I imagine that's very important, and you would recommend that to everyone? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think thorough induction is it's like the foundations of that relationship with volunteers, because if they've had a really good induction, then I think they're more likely to stay as well, if they have a sense that they're at home as soon as possible. I want people to feel comfortable here, like they know who to go to for help, they're getting to know other volunteers, they know how the organization works. So yeah, I think that does require some time.
Yeah. And maybe just to point out that by joining Make Your Mark as an organisation or as a volunteer, you do get support along the way around all these subjects, with lots of sort of online training as well. So it is worthwhile. And I think I've put in the chat that it's free and it's very easy to join as well. I'm going to go on to the next question, Joanna, if you have it. I don't think anyone's raising their hand here. So no, Joanna, if you could read out the next one. Thank you.
Yeah. So the next one, actually, you responded directly to in the chat, Audrey. So I'm going to jump to the next one after that, which was a question for Cass. And it's, did you have a formal induction training before starting volunteering, or was it more of a, quote, on the job learning as you go?
Trying to remember back. I think it was more sort of on the job. I started with a lot more simple tasks, and then sort of learned as I went to do sort of more complex tasks and to sort of get on and do it on my own. Probably better to ask Nicola, sorry.
That's all right, Cass. So all our volunteers get a volunteer induction with Gabby or Ren. And then I usually do like a 1-day induction, just going through different tasks and things. I can't even remember what was on there. But yeah, with Cass, we just started Cass on something that she was comfortable with. And then I train you as I go along, don't I? But generally, I would give, I just had how many, 4 or 5 new volunteers, and I kind of inducted them all on the same day. So they get like 2 days. Well, actually, it's maybe 1 day, Gabby, because yours doesn't take all day, does it? Thanks.
Good. Great. No, thank you very much. Thank you. Joanna, not Nicola. Nicola's on my screen. You're big on my screen. Joanna, have we got any more questions? Thank you.
Yes, we've got one question, which was for all the speakers. So anyone who would like to respond, if someone is interested in volunteering, would you rather they wait for you to advertise a role, or are you happy for them to reach out to you directly?
I was going to say, we're certainly happy for people just to literally come in off the street, which we have. We had a lady this week who's been living in Burnham for a couple of years now, but because she's now retired and she's a little bit more time on her hands. She just popped in. She was aware that we were looking for volunteers because we advertise in our local newspaper. And yeah, she just popped in during our opening hours and asked if she could volunteer here, and she came the next day. It was great. Yeah, so we're happy for them just to come in. We certainly don't advertise specific posts and then just interview for them and take them on. We literally just have people email me or phone me or walk in off the street, and we'll give them a form. We'll arrange for a day for them to come in where I've got a little bit of time. And we kind of introduce them to the archive, and if there's an Imogen and any other volunteers that are in here, and our kind of first kind of port of call is to sit them down in front of our database, because we have a public view side to our database. They can search to their heart's content in there without changing anything, and it allows them to go down rabbit holes basically and go and see where things are. So it kind of teaches them the layout of the archive, where to look for things, and they just start, they just kind of, you don't hear a peep out of them basically for a few hours. They go off on different kind of jaunts, and ask if they need anything. But then it's on the job training with us. But we have started doing regular volunteer meetings where all the volunteers are gathered together, so new ones can meet each other. Because when I used to volunteer here before I started working here, I never met the Monday volunteers because I was never here on a Monday. In fact, when I started working full time, because I'd been volunteering here for many years, I was then allowed to open the archive on a Monday evening, and two of us would come in on a Monday evening. So we were very flexible with our volunteers, and once I suppose that you know, knowing that person and the trust is built up, then you can be a bit more flexible with them. But yes, having the volunteers all together, so if there's the new gadgets or new bits of training, everybody can get that at the same time, and it gives everybody a chance to find out what jobs, what projects are on the go, and if there's any gaps that are needing filled, and people tend to come forward if they see that there are gaps in the week that they need to fill. So yeah.
Great. I don't know if Jennifer, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would just agree with what you've said there. We get people contacting us directly. So quite often it's maybe the students who are doing the courses and they're looking for specific types of volunteering opportunities. So absolutely happy for people to contact us directly. But we also have sort of a programme of specific things that we want to get done in addition to projects that are ongoing. So we would advertise that probably on our Facebook page and get people to, same as you're saying, fill out a form and then go from there, trying to find people with the right skill set for the different projects. So that'd be what we do. So yeah, contact us anyway. It wouldn't make any difference. We would still do our best to try and fit you in if we possibly could.
Okay. Now, can I ask, as a local authority archive, is it quite simple for you to join Make Your Mark? Or do you have to sort of go through various hoops through the council?
I think we'd have to go through various hoops, to be honest with you. It depends at what level we're allowed to join. So we're still just kind of looking at it, to be honest. It's something that's not sitting on my desk, it's sitting on somebody else's. So they'll be getting a poke when they come back from their holidays to try and get things moving. But yeah, a lot of things are quite slow and quite difficult with the council. So that is one of the things that is difficult for us. You know, we couldn't have volunteers in the search room by themselves and things like that. We're not allowed to do stuff like that. They don't have passes to go about the building themselves. They have to be accompanied by us. They don't have access to our network, and that's seen as a big security risk, although there is ways of getting around it. But our internet security providers are exceptionally awkward when it comes to stuff like that. You know, I don't understand why we couldn't just have a volunteer log in and they'd only be able to get into the certain files that they need to get into. So we've had to set up a Teams site specifically for volunteers, but they won't give us laptops for volunteers, so volunteers are having to use their own laptops. And there's a lot of red tape to allow us to get volunteers. And I can, you know, hear from the other speakers that they maybe have a wee bit more freedom than we do, and it's obviously quite frustrating for us, because you know there's so much that volunteers could be doing if the path was a bit smoother, but unfortunately we've got all these things to deal with, and the wheels of the council never move quickly, unfortunately. So you think something will only take you, you know, a month to sort out, and 6 months later you're having to go back to people saying, I'm really sorry, this isn't in place yet, you know, I can only apologise. And that's all you can do. If you keep the lines of communication open and people know what's happening and know where they are, they will hang about for an opportunity if it can work in with their own personal circumstances. But yeah, we are constrained by the council, shall we say.
Yes, and I think maybe with Scottish Council and Archives, I may be contacting, I think, all the local authority archives and see if we can do something about that, just to make it collectively, we might have a stronger voice to make things a little bit easier, to sort of help recruit volunteers through Make Your Mark.
That would be fantastic. That would be a big help.
Okay, okay, I've said it now, it's being recorded. I'm going to have to do it. Gabrielle, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, because you are very actually organised and you are the volunteer coordinator at the Glasgow Women's Library. So I don't know if there's anything
I think it's a bit similar to Jennifer and Ruth. We have a rolling program. People can send in an application anytime without specifying like a role that they would like to do. So people can just tell us they're interested, and actually Cass applied down that route, and then we were talking through like, these are some of the things that volunteers do, and we were chatting about this last week. Cass's face lit up when I mentioned archives, and I was like, oh, there's some interest there. So that's where it kind of came from. But then we also, so in January, Nicola and I worked together to do some specific recruitment for our volunteers to work in the archive. So we used the Make Your Mark portal, and we put stuff on our website as well. So we do a bit of both. We've moved to a recruitment, so we recruit 3 times a year, so people can send us in an application anytime, but they probably will have to wait a few months until the next round of recruitment. And that's really come about because of the volume of applications that we're getting, and we were kind of doing it as and when applications were coming in, but it's not an efficient way of doing it. And we found that actually starting 8 volunteers at the same time mean they get all to kind of start together, they get to know each other, and it kind of simplifies it for us as well. I mean, that doesn't mean that people can be waiting, but that's kind of the best we've come up with at the moment. And I think I was reflecting on my reply to the previous question about the duration of volunteering, and I think I wasn't totally satisfied with my reply but I think what I wanted to add is that it's really a resources issue. Like, we are really, really stretched all the time, and I think for us it's a bit of a like, what's the biggest impact we can have with our limited resources. So I believe that someone being with us for longer, or at least them intending on being with us for longer, is going to be more impactful than lots of people doing a few weeks here and there. So I think that's kind of part of that calculation. But yeah, in an ideal world, everyone who wants to volunteer with us for however long would come on board, and we'd slot them in. But that's utopia.
I think actually as well in the chat, Jennifer has also said that that's a really good point, is actually recruiting in batches. And as a volunteer myself in something, I actually really enjoy the sort of meeting on a regular basis fellow volunteers. So I do think that is a really good idea. I don't think we've got any more questions. And I will just wait a moment. I'll just check the chat, but I'm not seeing any more. And if anyone does have a question, they can always get in contact with us. Don't hesitate to do that. So this is the point where I would just like to say thank you to actually all our speakers, but also for everyone as well for joining us today. And I would also like to say a thank you to Erin and Joanna behind the scenes, making it all go very smoothly today for the webinar. That's really helpful. But we'd love to hear everyone's thoughts about the event, and Erin will be sending out a feedback form, and then we can make things better in the future as well. So there's been a lot about joining Make Your Mark. I highly recommend it, obviously. It is easy and it is free. There has been, I think you can see it, Erin has put the link in the chat, so you can just click on it. So just thanks again, and I hope to be seeing some of you again very soon. Thanks very much.